Hello everyone, welcome back to FFGLive. My name is Evan Johnson and I'm joined here today by the wonderful X-Wing developers. Would you care to introduce yourselves quickly for the internet?
Absolutely. I'm Max Brook. I'm one of the X-Wing developers.
Mm-hmm. And I'm Brooks Fluger-Levitt, and I'm also an X-Wing developer.
Awesome. So, as you guys may know, if you followed any of the marketing leading up to this, we're doing an AMA today. We've collected a bunch of questions in a forum thread that I've got here. Throw additional questions in the Twitch or YouTube chats, and I'll see those and ask them to these guys. And we're just going to launch into it and start talking about some X-Wing. Okay, so this question is from Joe Schmo 554. Are we likely to see titles released in the future for the existing huge ships that belong to the new factions, Resistance, First Order, Republic, and Separatist?
Yeah, so that is a very interesting question. Obviously, we can't speak to future products in any specific way, but I think that is design space we're very aware of and would like to explore at some point.
Yeah. And we have plans. We've already announced actually the Hot Shots and Aces pack, which contains a number of cards, including some for existing ships that have already been released. So we definitely have a method to do it. Whether or not it will happen on any specific time frame, can't say.
Of course. This one's from Brown J23. Why did the developers feel the need to reintroduce the snapshot card and other cards that allow for attacks out of the engagement phase?
This is a really interesting one because actually snapshot not making the jump to second edition initially was something that went back and forth. We really liked Snapshot in first edition. It was a really interesting card. It enabled a lot of unusual builds.
It's a fun interaction to do.
Yeah, it's just fun. So we planned to bring it back from the start, but we decided initially, we didn't quite have a grip on where second edition was going to be. We wanted to really control the basics before we got into anything too wild. So we dropped it initially, but the plan was always to bring it back. Now, interestingly, its twin card Foresight has kind of an interesting history where Foresight came about mostly because we realized it would be really weird and unthematic if Force users didn't have the ability to make reactive shots, but non-Force users did. And I'm pretty happy with how those came out, where you have sort of a difference of scope, and they do slightly different things, but they both give you that feel of like that quick reaction shot that we see all the time in Star Wars.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, a question that I'm sure lots of people are wondering about. This one's from Mega Silver and others. Why does the Nantex's pinpoint tractor array not include fully execute in its ability?
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked about C110P as well.
Yeah.
So both of those cards don't include fully execute intentionally. That is not an error. We intended them to function this way.
Yep, that's a design space we want to explore and want to continue to try and explore.
So yeah.
But that's something that you're going to be monitoring.
Yes, of course. And yeah, so one of the interesting things too is we should probably talk about the Nantex a little bit in general. Yeah. So why don't we get into that, because that's obviously a topic people are interested in, and I'm sure the chat is blowing up with it right now. Just first things first, get it out of the way. We're not making any changes to the Nantex before Worlds.
Right. I mean, it's less than 2 weeks away.
It's less than 2 weeks away. It wouldn't be fair to players. People need time to prepare their lists. People need a certain certainty that things work the way they say they do. With that said, we are very aware of the various reactions to the Nantex. It seems like people have a lot of opinions. I think we'll learn a lot from Worlds in terms of its top-tier competitive viability. But we very much got our eye on the mid-tier too. It's probably actually the area I'm most concerned about it personally, is the sort of mid-tier interactions and whether sort of showing up to an FLGS and getting, beaten on by, a Nantex you didn't expect is really a rough experience. And I think there's some really interesting questions about what that means about tractor beam in general, because it's interesting that both times tractor beam has been prominently in the meta, it's been in lists that a lot of people had a really negative reaction to. We also had the quad jumpers back in the day. So there's a lot of things we want to study, but we need more time and data to make any sort of change.
And also control effects more generally in second edition have been pretty toned down from what was possible in first edition. And there have been small spurts of prominence of, for example, veteran turret gunner Y-wings being taken en masse and certain other effects. But only the tractor beam, or only the tractor token effect through the quad jumper and now the Nantex has seen any sort of major reaction that didn't initially fade away. Of course, it's still early yet. We'll be continuing to watch how that plays out.
One of the good things about second edition in general is we have a lot of levers we can pull. We can change points.
Right.
We can change how the rules reference functions. It's a living document.
Yep.
We can use errata if necessary. We have errata a few cards. It's something we would prefer not to do in general. The main reason being not so much a admission that we did it wrong. I honestly don't have that much pride about that. But really because we want the card to do what it says it does.
Yeah, it raises the barrier to entry.
Exactly. If you're a new player and you're approaching the game, it is good if the card says it does what it does. Now, sometimes it is better to change it. Sometimes that's worth doing. But it has to be a really high cost for it to be worth changing. And it's better if we can change something that we can change more freely without making it more confusing to new players.
Yeah. So this is a question in the Twitch chat from, I think this is Rigged. So he's asking about the Black Squadron Scouts, the Initiative 3 TIE Strikers. He says, why are they so unplayably bad? Their current 38 price is comically non-viable.
So points costs generally are something that are going to be, that have changed, will continue to change throughout the course of this game. That is one of the big things we brought forward to second edition. Importantly, point costs now are descriptive rather than prescriptive. They're used to describe how things are currently performing. So things that are not performing in a way that reflects their point costs are a candidate for change, obviously. And that is going to be true for almost anything, for almost any ship. And also, this kind of gets to some of the other questions we were talking about before we went live on the stream.
Right.
But there is a very fine balance point between the pricing of the generics on a ship and the pricing on the uniques of a ship. Especially because in tournament play specifically, ships get played so much, so many repetitions are played, that even a small difference of a point or two in efficiency might be very significant, and so most ships tend to favor either their uniques or their generics.
Yeah.
This is a really great segue to that other question you mentioned earlier, about the V19 torrent.
Sure, let me just jump to that so I can read the question.
Absolutely.
And then we can get to it. So this one is from Brunus in the forum. So he said, this one has a little bit of setup, so I'll just read that. With a few exceptions, ship chassis seem to favor either copies of multiple filler generics or have one or two limited pilots that stand out. For example, the V19 named pilots are a bit lacking, but the generic options are great. On the other side, Darth Vader in the TIE Advanced X1 is fantastic, but the generic options have struggled a bit. My question is, when you're designing a ship, do you have a role like this in mind? When making the TIE Advanced X1, were you very concerned about the pilots that aren't Darth Vader, or is it mostly about Darth Vader, and if the others work, then that's great? Similarly for the Name 19, for the V19s.
So for the V19s, I actually think this is a very interesting one because through the points testing we did, the named V19s outperformed the generics very consistently. And so we continued to drop the points on the generics. Clearly we dropped them past the threshold where the generics exceeded the named pilots, but that didn't really come out in the testing. And it's interesting that it wasn't until it sort of hit the wider community that became clear that we'd crossed that threshold, because it really seemed like nobody would take the generics ever when only marginally cheaper named pilots existed with some pretty good abilities.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting one there, where that just really goes to show how thin that margin is. That we dropped at a point and we tested, and we dropped at a point and we tested, we dropped at a point and we tested, and we said, okay, let's go live with this. It seems like they're in equilibrium, and it turned out actually they were a little on the other end of the spectrum. So it's interesting just the way that happens, where you get this very very tricky balance there. Now with the Advance and Vader, obviously there's a little bit of a difference there, because there we have a very iconic character. Darth Vader is the TIE Advanced pilot.
Yeah. So a different example of a ship but one that's very recent, the Fireball, which will be coming out in Wave 6, is a very character-focused ship, much like the TIE Advanced. And so there are some ships, to the more development-oriented part of this question, that are very focused on their iconic character or the iconic characters who are seen with them. And so those are ships that we are going to focus very heavily on making that character interact with that ship in a fun, positive way, and that's the focus of development and testing. And other characters of lesser importance and generic pilots are still things we want to include, but definitely have to take a back seat to whatever main focus the ship has, where that's almost the opposite with the more kind of standardized military ships, V-19s, X-Wings, TIE Fighters, that tend to have more squad synergy abilities, more teamwork abilities, fewer individually standout powerful pilots, but tend to be more effective with generic. And then there are some ships that kind of fall into a mid-ground. And with all of these, a difference of 1 or 2 points in either direction can tilt the perception of a ship between whether it is more effective as including one or several as just the bulk of your list versus whether you're focusing on a character to really emphasize that character's ability or a certain combination of effects or upgrade cards.
All right, so this question is from Kale Acia. It's just, are more pilot packs planned for the future, such as Hot Shots and Aces, I believe?
Well, to some extent, that is going to depend on how well the current one is received.
Yeah.
We certainly think they're a good idea, a fun and interesting way to get content out to players and to factions that don't have ships coming out in the immediate future or in the last wave or two.
And to get to characters we might not have gotten to the first time around for whatever reason.
There's actually a very specific example of that in the current one.
There is.
If you want to tell that story.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, the story is rather short, but obviously the only people more excited for K2SO to be in the game than you or us. We've been really looking forward to putting K2SO in for a long time, and so having an avenue to do that is fantastic. And there are a lot of those characters who we would like to have gotten to, or just there are some ships that just have a ton of pilots, and there's a cool scene where Ezra flies this, but we didn't get to it, because we felt like Ezra had a lot of representation already, but maybe in the future we look at another, chance for Ezra to fly that ship or something. Examples like that.
And there's some ships that when they come out, we don't have as many pilots for them, but then later down the road, more material comes out, more media that depicts more characters in them that we want to go back and touch on. And it's a great opportunity to get to do that. And so if you feel the same way, let us know.
So following up on Hot Shots and Aces, this one's from Paul Rudd, says, when development on Hot Shots and Aces started, how did you decide which ships would receive new pilots?
So initially, we went off of a list of the ships that had been re-released in 2nd edition. So, for example, the Z95, the Jumpmaster, I believe, isn't on that list. I forget if the M3A ended up being there or not for the Scum, but the RZ2 A-Wing is one of the new ships in 2nd edition, but had only gotten a single ship pack's worth of pilots, whereas the Resistance T-70 had a whole bunch carried over from 1st edition, and then more added in 2nd edition already, so we focused on the RZ2, the MG-100. That tended to be the driving factor. We included K2SO, despite the U-Wing have a lot of pilots, because we wanted to include that character specifically. So that was where we started, and there were some changes along the line, but that is the bulk of what drove that initial selection of pilots, at least.
Sure. Let's see. Are you still planning to use Legend ships for future releases, or are the E-Wing and Alpha-class Starwing only around because they were grandfathered into the game?
So this is sort of an interesting one that just gets into some wider questions. But basically, there aren't strict, hard and fast rules about what ships we can or can't, talk to LFL about doing. But ultimately, it's always a conversation. And they're very good to work with. They're always great. They're always open to ideas, but they also have certain things they want to emphasize at certain times or not.
Right.
So ultimately, there's no easy answer there. I mean, with that said, there is a lot of upcoming Star Wars content.
Yeah. New movies.
And we're excited to work on content related to it.
Yeah. So bit of a non-answer, but
the decisions are made on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. So I guess kind of playing off of that same sort of thought from Cleveland Stream 17, are we going to see characters from the Rebels TV show piloting different ships as they did in the series, like Ahsoka Tano in the A-Wing, Ezra in the A-Wing, Hera in the A, B, or Y?
It's certainly possible. However, those characters do fly a lot of ships in that series.
Yeah.
So we're probably not going to get to all of them because there are a lot, and there are other characters and other ships we'd like to include pilots for, and other characters we may want to do in the future in those ships. But they are iconic appearances, and we'll try and focus on and sort of prioritize them, what we think will be the most appealing options, whether we're doing new characters and new ships or familiar characters and existing ships.
And Hera and the B-Wing would be a really exciting thing to be able to put on the table.
It would be really cool. You'd have to figure out how to do the giant cannon, the composite laser beams, but that would be... It's a great scene. It's a shame she only flies it once.
Yeah, yeah. This one's from Krabak on YouTube. The new Ghost fits the Sheathipede great, but doesn't fit the attack shuttle. Can we expect a redesigned attack shuttle to also fit into the new Ghost's slot?
That's a cool idea.
Yeah.
Can't speak specifically to future products, but we'll mark that one down.
Yeah, sounds cool. All right, from Classical Moser. Will we be getting alternative configurations or titles to shake up existing original trilogy ships, such as earlier battling A-Wing, B-Wing prototype, etc.?
Well, so we're not going to comment on our future product plans, but we have already announced the content list for Hotshots and Aces, and it does include a stabilized S-Foils configuration for the B-Wing that is going to give it some new abilities and some new flavor that there just wasn't the bandwidth to do on its initial release in second edition. Whether or not we'll do more of those, you'll have to wait and see.
You know, the B-Wing almost got the S-Foils back in first edition. It was a thing we were seriously considering. So.
Right. Perfect. All right, this one from Transmogrifier, and I've seen some people asking about this in the chat as well. What is the goal or purpose of the Hyperspace format moving forward?
So this is a really interesting one because Hyperspace has obviously evolved a lot as a format. In some ways, it's evolved more than Extended because each edition has such an interesting impact. So moving forward, Hyperspace is going to continue to be something that you don't need to buy a ton of things to be able to play it, right? You can pick up a few things. You want to start the game, you're excited to get into it, you can pick up a few things and have a Hyperspace list. But it's not going to be just as focused around the new releases.
Right.
Moving forward, we're going to do updates to the Hyperspace format, and sort of probably coinciding vaguely with the points updates. And these updates will change what's in the pool. And they may change it pretty radically. There'll probably be some things that are always in the Hyperspace pool. I would expect to see X-Wings and TIE Fighters.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine a game of X-Wing without a T-65 and a TIE LN.
But pilots might not stay in. One big change is that it's not going to be as product-based in the future, possibly. Sure. So, like, we might move to, some pilots are in, but others aren't. So, Luke and Wedge are in, but Biggs isn't, or whatever,
And importantly, the upgrade pool will be more heavily curated in that format to not just be what's in the most recent products, but what combinations of upgrades, since we know what pilots are in and there's a relatively limited pool, and we can then also choose a limited pool of upgrades for that format to give a more kind of cohesive game experience, to focus more on certain aspects of play, and we may change those aspects over time, but to kind of focus in on some core game experiences or some fun mechanics that have been introduced potentially in later waves that we want to really highlight.
Perfect. More games seem to be going to time and not reaching a conclusion in 75 minutes. Do you perceive this as an issue? And if so, do you have a plan to address it?
You want this one, Brooks?
Sure. So this is a trend that we've been aware of and that we've been talking to OP about. The reasons why this is happening are many and varied. And some of them are actually very good things that have come out of the transition from first edition to second edition. For example, if a pair of lists are more evenly matched or less unbalanced, it's more likely that they'll take longer to play. Also, a point you brought up when we were talking about this beforehand is that with less absolutely reliable dice modification, it's just possible to miss on attacks and fail to damage your opponent a couple times if the dice swing one way or the other. And since you already need to position your ships accurately to attack, you can quite easily end up with a situation where it's taking you longer than you might have expected. So that's a general trend we're watching. there are some specific mechanics in the game that do interact with that more likelihood of going to time in ways that feel somewhat unintuitive.
Especially in the tournament rules.
Yeah, specifically in tournament play, where you're scoring a game at time rather than just playing to destruction with any amount of time. And so mechanics like regeneration or high initiative repositioning are things that we're definitely keeping an eye on in terms of how they can potentially cause a game resolved at time through point scoring to not feel as thoroughly resolved. But again, there are a lot of different factors, and we're going to take our time, and if we do make any changes, we're going to make sure we're making the right changes and not just jump to anything.
Awesome. The Twitch chat definitely liked that answer. I see
good.
some comments. Yeah, you tell him, Brooks. Brooks is my hero. Brooks on top.
Oh, thank you.
This one's from Catacan Ninja. Have you seen episode 9 yet?
No. Have you?
No.
I was gonna do a no comment, but I can't even do that seriously. No, I haven't.
Are there any ships or mechanics that you feel that points adjustments have not been an effective way of balancing?
So this is an interesting one because I think from a does it show up at top table, the answer is no. Points are pretty effective for that. But there are mechanics that have sometimes worked out in ways that we don't necessarily want to work out that way. So this one never went to live this way, but there was a lot of back and forth on how Ion worked during development. And one of the interesting things about it was we found that it sort of had trouble with this. The Ion mechanics in numerous iterations we did had trouble feeling like they were sort of, like you could make them inefficient, but you couldn't make them a good experience. And so that's the sort of mechanic that can be really troublesome. There are other things that we've definitely seen. There are certain combinations of cards once you get into the really large upgrade stacks that are probably not good at any price, but certainly annoying to deal with at any price, and not necessarily things we want in the game. But generally, points are a pretty good tool for that. And when it's not points, it's usually something more fundamentally in the rules reference rather than text on a card.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been a few examples. We did close off an infinite loop by errating feedback array. Or was it feedback array? No, static discharge vans.
Yep.
Static discharge vans, yes. So that closed off an infinite loop. So there are occasionally little hiccups like that.
Yeah, but this is a horrible pun, but nothing in this game exists in a vacuum.
All right, well, that's our stream.
The external pressures of, like the previous question, the pressures of a time limit in competitive play, or the maximums or minimums of the number of ships or the power level of any individual ship that you can fit into a points limit, do sometimes cause weird situations that, again, like Max said, can often be balanced in competitive performance, but not necessarily in play experience. And that's where those are the things that we are continually watching and trying to revisit.
Sure.
I mean, another interesting example of that, too, that isn't as much of a problem, but it's just an interesting phenomenon, is the sort of large ship count lists tending not to be favored because the meta pressure.
This is very interesting.
So, large ship count lists have at various points been really efficient, sort of on paper. But taking them to a tournament is hard because it is just a lot of work to fly a lot of ships on the table. And that can be tiring, and so you might, win the battle but lose the war, right? So there's almost this logistics element to it that's this other pressure, and raises some really interesting question about points. Like, should we discount a strategy if it is more costly to execute to you, the player, and how do we value that?
In mental energy, even.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, if you've seen me play on stream here before, I position all of my ships at different angles, and that requires more mental effort, but gives me more freedom to move around. And when I block my opponent out of a more square or 90 or 45 degree offset formation, it has a bigger impact on their flying strategies. But it's more work to play. And so there's very interesting things with different play styles interacting with the game environment in ways that don't necessarily are difficult to reflect through points.
Yeah.
All right, I see a number of people asking about this on Twitch and on YouTube. Basically boils down to, how do you feel about gas clouds since their release?
I mean, when we released Gas Clouds, we wanted to add a new obstacle and we wanted to, shake things up, add something interesting and new to the game. I feel pretty good about Gas Clouds having done that. I assume that implicit in that is people asking, do we want to add some sort of penalty to Gas Clouds? I think that's something we've been looking at for a while. It's a possibility. We'll continue to look at it, and that's the great thing about a living rules reference. It hasn't seemed like it has been something that needed to happen for crucial purposes, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't happen in the long run. So it's exactly the sort of thing we want to move at a sort of measured pace on, make sure if we make a change, we actually like it, it's a good change, and isn't, worse than the disease.
Right, right.
But I do think it's interesting that people feel very strongly about that one. So it's something we're very much keeping an eye on.
And also, if and or when we ever decide to do something with that, it's still important to keep all of the obstacles actually distinct from each other in play. We don't just want them to all essentially come down to the same types of penalties, types of interactions. And so one way we can change the incentives around interacting with different types of obstacles without actually changing the rules for the obstacles themselves is to introduce either upgrade cards or abilities that interact with some types of obstacles in different ways, or even some types of tokens in different ways. An effect that clears stress, for example, is more effective against debris fields. Ways to deal damage without attacking are more effective in an asteroid field, in case you lose your attacks from that. And in the card packs we have coming in Wave 6, we have a couple of environment cards that specify specific combinations of obstacles and add specific additional special rules to them for gameplay. So you can have all of the gas clouds be ion clouds and ionized ships that pass through them, or you can have Minox hiding in the asteroids to eat your ships. And so there's a lot of different possibilities. The game is bigger than just kind of the standard deathmatch format, and we want to expand it more and give players more opportunities to play the game in different ways.
A really good example of that, actually, one thing we did there. So in epic scenarios, I think we ended up having all the scenarios just let you take whatever obstacles you wanted, but we built into the epic scenarios a little field that tells you what obstacles to take. And, if we want to just specify in a scenario, like, hey, take these obstacles, we can do that. So there might be some scenarios that are like, oh, this is specifically in this type of environment. Or you can, at current, you can apply the cards from the obstacle pack to those scenarios. But there might be cases where we also do more specified stuff like that. So that's always a possibility as well.
For sure. Missing Link 91 asks, will those environment packs you're talking about, will those be legal for organized play for tournament
So they are not intended to directly be added to standard tournament play, but there's absolutely no reason you couldn't include them in a local event or potentially in a side event at a convention or something. Because they'll certainly offer different opportunities, different ways to interact with the game, encourage you to use cards that you haven't used before or haven't used in a while, or different pilots or ships, to try out these different experiences.
Yeah, and so I think one of the big things too is, again, is we have epic battles coming out. First, we're going to see hopefully more events, with people playing, slightly more narrative, slightly less, competitive events where you probably go and maybe you have a record, but you maybe don't get to an overall winner because playing 6 to 8 epic games in a day would be a lot of.
Oh, please, I want to do this.
I would be very tired. I would need 2 days for that at least. But anyway, so, that sort of places a great opportunity to use those. And, who can say what the future holds for, like, OP events too. If you're interested in seeing these inside events or whatever, talk to them, and I'm sure they would love that feedback.
Yeah.
And also, the Epic Battles expansion contains a number of components that you can use to come up with your own scenarios that are featured in the existing ones. The various remotes and objectives, both the tokens and the stat cards for things like turrets and structures and satellites and shuttles.
And if you add the objectives to that, then you can, or the environment cards to that, you can suddenly have like a little scenario builder kit almost.
If you want to escort a shuttle in the evacuation of Bespin, you could take the gas clouds and some of the environment cards plus the shuttle objectives and run one of those.
Perfect. Are you happy with the current points update schedule?
Yes. I would say yes. I think that's, to elaborate on that, I think that people need a certain amount of time for the points to be true. Again, we have emergency updates as a tool. We have used them. We probably will again someday, but we prefer not to. It's good if the points are what it says on the website and they're consistent for a while. I mean, we know they're going to change because at the end of the day, when we change the points, we probably create something that is now too efficient because some set of synergies comes together, and that thing is allowed to be good for a while, and then it'll eventually get tamped down. And ideally, we're not trying to crush things out of the meta generally. I mean, there are a few things that we've pushed out more forcefully, but usually we're not trying to blow up the best build. We want the best build to go from being, S tier to A tier, essentially.
Right.
With this sort of ultimate goal of there being no S tier, but realistically, people are really good at this game, and we'll probably find something that's really efficient.
Yeah, and the game gets played so much. So one thing we found that's really interesting is even without points updates or introductions of new content, the meta does continue to evolve. There was definitely a period in the spring where over the course of 3 or 4 months, we went through 3 or 4 different major competitive meta environments naturally without any new releases coming up in between them to spur that. And so I think that is still happening is a really good sign that we don't want to take it any faster. Let you all play the game for a while and explore it, and then if it starts getting stale or if we've identified some things that we want to change, we'll put those changes in but not rush them.
Yeah, absolutely.
We also need time to test the changes. When we're looking at a new, the thing about an economy is when you change one element of it, everything else sort of changes, in this complex rippling series of ways, and you have to test that to know what it's going to do.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, here's a more rulesy question. We're not doing too many rules questions over this, but this one has been asked by a couple people. What's the order of operations for pinpoint tractor array? Do you complete tractor effects and then rotate, or vice versa?
This is going to probably be part of. We're going to do a couple of FAQ type things in the next couple of days before Worlds, and the ability queue and a few other topics are things we'll hit at length.
Perfect. All right. Well, stay tuned for that, and you can.
I'll make sure that one's
answers right over there.
I'm pretty sure that was on the list anyway, but I'll make sure it is.
Yeah.
All right. This one's from Krawick as well as many other people. Are you planning any Republic or Separatist-specific huge ships? If so, would additional factions also gain access to them, as is the case with the existing huge ships?
So, I mean, I don't know about you. I really like the Republic and the Separatists.
I really like the Republic and Separatists.
And I really like huge ships.
I really like huge ships.
So that's certainly something we
can't comment
like
on future releases.
As to whether they'd be multi-faction products or not, so that's something that has to be handled case by case.
Right.
But I think for huge ships in particular, multi-faction is a really good thing because it they take a lot of time and energy, especially, I mean, our sculpting team does such amazing work on them, and but they're a lot of overhead. And, so getting one of them out is a lot of work, and they're not going to come out a whole lot faster.
Yeah.
Almost no matter what. So if they can be multi-faction, that means that a couple different factions are getting a shot of new stuff.
Yeah.
When we do them, that means we're getting a little more impact for the work we're doing, which is good. And
it means more people can play with them.
Exactly, more people get to play with their toys. So ideally, we would like that, but it's impossible to say because it has to be so case by case.
Yep. Awesome. Questions from Exification. When it comes to designing ships, a couple questions about that. How do you decide on ships to even begin the game design process for?
First you invent the universe. First, we have a thing called a vision document, and essentially that document says we think this ship would be a good idea, and we take that to management and Lucasfilm and lots of people, and
we talk through it. What are the advantages of doing a certain ship? What media is it related to? What characters show up in it? Have we done other similar ships? Have we done other different ships? And then
How will it affect the game? What interesting things will it bring to the equation?
can sculpting sculpt the miniature?
Yeah. And then from there, if we get the go-ahead from all the people involved, we start making the ship.
Awesome. How do you decide what will make that ship unique? Is it based on the ship's in-lore descriptions?
Yes.
Yep, we read a lot of the Incredible Cross Sections books, the Complete Vehicles, Complete Star Wars. We have a pretty extensive library of material like that at our office. Plus,
Rebels, Resistance, Clone Wars, movies.
we are all Star Wars fans ourselves, so I read a lot of the novels. Our producer Gavin reads the comics more regularly. Anytime any of us sees anything new, we'll constantly contact each other, and so our Monday morning, often if there's been a new release about an upcoming Star Wars content, we'll be talking about what new things we've seen in the trailer.
And when we're working on something new, we're always digging for every little bit of information about that. So the ship appeared in the we saw Poe do this cool trick in his T-70 in the Poe comic. Can we do anything with that? Oh, we saw
This gadget is mentioned in the Cross Sections book. That character flies it in that novel, etc.
Right. Once a ship has been approved or decided that it'll be added, what's the process for creating unique pilots, specifically if they're not unique pilots already in the lore?
So, that gets to a larger question, which is, once we're working on the ship, what does that look like?
Yeah.
I'm going to do a little brief thing here.
Yeah.
Which is, the actual development of the gameplay stats of the ship is only one of several different things we do. The visioning and concepting process is a very important part of any project to make sure that our department, sculpting, art, graphic design, production, are all working towards the same goal. So there's quite a lot of work that we put in to make sure that's all going on track. A very important part, specifically for characters, is commissioning art pieces for those characters, both of them individually for crew cards and upgrades, and of their ships in action, to make sure that we can depict them and make a thematic connection. Because ultimately, this game is set in this incredible setting that we all know and love and enjoy. And so we do a lot of work, not just on the game mechanics, but on all of these other things that tie into making this Poe's Black One, rather than just a sci-fi spaceship with a certain ability in the game.
Right.
As far as finding characters or making characters, we will do some pretty deep dives into lore.
We get a lot of people from the RPG.
RPGs, both our own and existing ones from previous editions of Star Wars, role-playing, from novels, from comics. We do have some, most often Imperial and First Order characters who have call signs, because they're just essentially somebody who goes by that over the radio, who has a certain ability.
And sometimes those call signs show up in fun places. We saw that our friend Jad Scorch Bean shows up in the TIE Fighter Owner's Manual.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sometimes that nickname that everyone thought sounded cool gets to get a little life and give a speech about how to fly a TIE Fighter.
Yeah.
From Tortugatron, Ewok glider when?
That joke is so old.
It is a very old joke. I honestly didn't expect to hear that one back. So
I have been hearing that joke since before I was a playtester for X-Wing First Edition.
This joke isn't our problem anymore. This is what we have Legion for.
There we go.
Go bother them about
it. Just shift it over. Take the joke.
This is Alex Davies' problem now.
That's why we scheduled the AMAs in this order.
All right, this one's from Eisenhow. Scum currently has the most ships of any faction, and it seems likely they'll get more in the future. Are you concerned they might end up with too many ships, making it difficult to find a niche for each one, or to balance all the possible combos? If so, how do you plan to avoid such problems?
So, there's a few things in here. Second edition, because first edition we had this problem too, and we really felt it. Because in first edition we didn't have linked actions. We didn't have action difficulties. We didn't have ship abilities, except through convoluted upgrade card means.
We had half as many advanced maneuvers until very late in first edition.
And many of the early ships didn't have those advanced maneuvers, which made balancing later ships with those advanced maneuvers very hard against them. See the challenges the X-Wing faced.
Yes.
So basically, we built ourselves a lot of levers because we knew this was going to be a problem. Now, Scum, interestingly, they bring up that example. I think Scum is probably the easiest to design a new interesting role for because all of these Scum ships are so weird and interesting. And now this does mean that we need to not fall into the pattern of feeling like it's easy and not pushing ourselves, because I actually think some of our most interesting differentiated design has been in the Empire. But you'll notice the Empire has a lot of ship abilities, and it's sort of become a faction theme, but it partly became a faction theme because they have a lot of TIE chassis ships, and we needed ways to make them feel different.
Right.
And really make them feel different. I remember even back in first edition, again, when Frank was designing the TIE Striker, he wanted to give it this really wild, sort of the proto-ship ability, because he was like, I don't know how I make this different from an Interceptor otherwise. And he did that, and that sort of set the design direction of how we were going to do that in the future, and that's really carried forward.
Perfect. Taste the Rainbow asks, have you considered moving any ships from late or early timelines to more than one faction?
So this is something that is a little interesting because in Star Wars, Star Wars is a setting with an established history, essentially, and the playing pieces in our game are equipment. They are vehicles and weapons and items that people use, and people of all factions use. For the sake of maintaining a coherent and persistent visual presentation, most ships are locked into one or two factions that they are most commonly associated with, because those are the factions that they belong to, that the most pilots fly them, especially in visual sources being the most prominent. There is definitely some bleed over. Scum have, both from first edition and some things in second edition, some ships. Obviously Resistance and Rebel ships, many of which are related. Imperial and First Order ships are related. Some Republic ships show visual continuations into the Imperial lines. So it's certainly something that's a possibility, but it's not something we want to jump to right off the bat. One-off things, Max and I were talking a couple days ago about sort of one-off things versus the things we see most commonly. And the things we see most commonly are the best candidates for inclusion in the standard game, and those sort of one-off experiences where a character steals a ship, or two characters with very different backgrounds who normally fight each other team up against a third enemy. That sort of is really more suitable for epic play, scenario play, narrative play, where you are telling the story of the background. But if every standard battle at a tournament was you against Darth Vader and Wedge Antilles flying together for some reason, that would be kind of immersion breaking.
This one is from Squirrel808. Is there room in the game for pilot-specific upgrades? For example, could we have a Rogue Leader title card for Luke without worrying about making Biggs too good?
That's a really good question. That's something we've generally avoided, and there are a few reasons for it, but I do think there's room in the game for it. It's certainly something we could explore. It's interesting design space.
Yeah.
The main reason we haven't done it is essentially, as we were discussing earlier, as you mentioned, if we're going to put the energy into making a new upgrade card, it's good if a lot of people can use it, because it creates this, new interesting piece that suddenly might breathe life into a whole bunch of things people weren't even thinking about before. Snapshot coming back suddenly changes the whole dynamic of ships like A-Wings.
Right.
In general, it's not something we tend to reach for as a tool immediately, but I don't think I would say it's off the table either. It's certainly a thing that could happen either for theme reasons or just for mechanical interest reasons. So it's a possibility. We definitely do consider it.
Yep, and there are degrees of limitation between everyone can take it and only one pilot can take it. We could do ship-specific abilities. We could do limited specific abilities, or abilities that only non-limited pilots can take, or that work better either explicitly with limited or non-limited pilots, higher initiative or lower initiative pilots, or that just because of the way they interact with the board state, ships at certain initiatives or ships with certain abilities or maneuvers on their dials interact better with that ability than others. And that kind of more nuanced design space where it's still available to a lot of different pieces and a lot of different combinations and players who want to play those things. But it still brings out or evokes some thematic thing is a really good way to work. So that's why we don't see too many character-specific effects.
Sure. Question from that Ronin guy. Can you talk about why there doesn't seem to be any new faction content except a generic pilot in the upcoming huge ship expansions?
Yes. So the reason for that is that those expansions are essentially relaunches of existing products.
Yep.
We wanted, and so the conversion kits include basically stuff that is being converted forward. There are maybe a few new characters, but they're sort of, in most cases, they're characters who are sort of reworks of older abilities or some sort of shift, kind of like we saw in the Rebel, Scum, and Imperial conversion kits. It's essentially sort of converting your collection. But we felt it was really important that huge ships be available to the new factions.
Right.
And we didn't want to cut them out of this whole cool part of the game. So we wanted to make sure they were included. We wanted to make sure they got some things. But we didn't, that wasn't the main function of that product.
Right, absolutely. Question from Lose Talk says, "Hey FFG, keep up the awesome job you're doing with the X-Wing game. Questions. Are the upcoming obstacles from the pack different from the currently available ones? Asteroids, gas clouds, etc."
There are new shapes of gas cloud, I believe, but I think that's it.
Okay.
There are all of the existing ones from first edition that were not brought back in the core set are brought back in the obstacle packs, and there's a couple new shapes of gas cloud.
All right. A question from, I think this is rigged. Why was the First Order test pilot, Initiative 4 silencer, not decreased alongside the other non-Kylo silencers in the last update? In the last Q&A, you stated all non-Kylo silencers were made cheaper, but the test pilot was not. Was it overlooked?
No, I think I just misspoke in that interview.
Yeah.
I don't think it was overlooked.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe it actually was decreased in points.
Was it? I'd have to
I was
check.
looking over your shoulder when you were scrolling through a points thing, and I'd seen that question. So
I'd have to take a look at the records. I would totally believe that I misspoke. I've been known to do that occasionally. I try to keep it as limited as possible when I'm on camera.
Yeah. Well, it is difficult. Are there any plans for a Heroes of the Aturi cluster style expansion, something that brings more RPG-like elements into the game?
Well, I have an RPG background. Brooks has a background with RPGs, and on top of that, loves campaigns more than any, in miniatures games, more than any person I know.
and maybe any person I know. It sounds like a cool idea.
Sounds like a cool idea. Are there any plans to have current pilots in different ships or in different life stages, like a Jedi Knight Luke, a young Wedge, etc.?
We already have this. We have Little Annie. We have Anakin Skywalker, hero of Naboo, flying the N1 Starfighter.
I got into a lengthy discussion during early development about whether we needed subtitles or not. And I will not say who was on the against side, but I was on the for side, and I'm very glad that I managed to persuade them that it was worthwhile because it's great design space.
Yeah, we have used it. We will continue to use it. It's great for us.
Perfect. To what extent, this is from Apoapsis, to what extent is the top-heavy distribution of pilot initiatives desired or considered an issue?
It's something we're keeping our eye on very closely. We're trying to gather as much data on it as possible. We've certainly seen there's a lot of discussion about it. It's something that comes up all the time in internal points test stuff. So it's a topic we're keeping our eye on. I think in a perfect world, we would love to see a more even distribution of, like high and low initiatives. So that's something we're working toward. On the other hand, as you mentioned, and when we were talking about this earlier, seeing iconic characters on the table is really important.
Yep, and most iconic Star Wars characters who fly ships at all tend to be very good pilots. So they tend to have initiatives of 4, 5, 6. So,
but on that previous point, thanks to subtitles, we can do things like Little Annie.
Little Annie, I4.
But has a very potent ability.
It's a good trick.
It is a good trick.
Yep. Okay, how do you resist the temptation of making the game more competitive oriented and thus more and more rules heavy?
Well, games that persist over time are going to get more rules heavy to a degree. That is, unless you're not making new content for your game, that is not going to be avoidable, really. So there are a few ways to deal with this. It's a huge, interesting question of complexity creep and power creep, and you can read all sorts of interesting things about it by very game developers who studied this in video games and have much more data than I do. And it's a really interesting problem that every game has to face. X-Wing's way of dealing with it is a fewfold. So we have the ability to change points costs, which is actually significant to this because it means that we can keep sort of, like if something is, if some combination is just too weighty, we can increase the points costs of those pieces a little bit to push you to not take them together.
Yes, and a good example of that is upgrade cards that some of which now cost as much as an additional ship because they are worth an additional ship, both in terms of their mechanical power and in terms of the complexity they add to the game. A ship that can reposition before its maneuver with, for example, supernatural reflexes is adding at least as much board state complexity as having another TIE fighter on the table, if not more.
You can buy your own ship for that, and you should be able to.
Yeah.
Also, we try to reuse design space as much as possible. When we introduce a new element, we're not just frivolously doing it. We only introduce a new element when we can't solve the problem some other way, and then we try to get a lot of mileage out of that element. Expect to see a lot of strain tokens.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, couple more questions is pretty much all we have time for, but let's get into these last few. From Flying Anchors, at the beginning of 2.0, we were introduced to the concept of dark side upgrades, yet to date we've only received one, which is hate. Has the concept of having force powers to distinguish between dark side and light side users been abandoned, or will we potentially see more dark side upgrades in the future?
No, it has not been abandoned.
Yes, you will potentially see more in the future.
For each of you, what was your favorite ship to design, and then your favorite ship that the other person designed?
All right, well, I got an easy one for which one you've designed.
Yeah, this is a little skewed, given our respective amounts of time developing X-Wing.
All right, so I'll start with my favorite ship you designed because it's always easier for me to compliment other people's work, and it's a ship we were just talking about. It's Little Annie.
Yes.
I love that guy.
I gotta
And
say,
I love that spinning is a good trick.
and I gotta say, developing the N1 Starfighter was a lot of fun. I think I said this on the streams at the time it was coming out, but I grew up watching episode 1 and episode 2 with my cousins on VHS, and N1 Starfighters both are really iconic and visually appealing, and also the traits sort of associated with them and how they fly, their maneuverability, let me really kind of work on making a ship that was just enjoyable to play with, that fast, maneuverable, but not in a like fiddly way, more in a like throttle all the way down kind of way, and that just zip around the table. And the reactions I got from playtesters when we were playtesting it and from fans once it came out were really rewarding to see that kind of like gleefulness in flying a ship again.
Yeah.
My favorite thing I've designed, I've decided, if you need a second,
Go ahead.
is the Trade Federation drone. It's my favorite pilot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's your favorite of his.
Yeah.
Because I am really happy that I was able to make a ship with banks more difficult than its turns.
We are very pleased with ourselves about this for droids generally.
And yeah, so I can't take full credit for this. This one was really a team effort. I mean, this was something we've been talking about since first edition. Calculate was designed, as part of the initial outset of second edition because we knew we needed it. Frank and Alex and Brooks and Michael and all sorts of other people who were participating in conversations are owed a lot in this. This was a team effort, but I love flying those little guys, and I love looking at that dial and being like, droid, why won't you turn subtly? Why can you only go...
Oh, I'm going left now. Oh, I'm going right now. We had a lot of fun playtesting the Separatists, especially for Wave 3. Frank did too. The Separatist drones are also his favorite ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of paradigm breaking in a way, but not in a sort of powerful way or a way that you can't deal with, just in a way that subverts your expectations a little bit and feels more robotic. Like they're just, I'm gonna turn left, I'm gonna turn right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you guys have anything that you would like to share with the community before we sign off? I guess a reminder to everyone that as far as specific rules questions go, there's an FAQ coming up in these next couple days here that should clear up some of that stuff.
It'll be some forum answers. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Not a fully fledged FAQ PDF, but answers in forums that should clear up like ability queue and whatnot, that sort of thing. Do you guys have anything else you want to share with the community?
Thanks for playing this game. Thanks for taking an interest in this and, letting us do this crazy job. I don't know. I'm always appreciative of the energy and enthusiasm and, memes and all that stuff. So
yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's really fun to see what the community will make of ships and upgrades and content and what things you will come up with in terms of paint schemes and scenarios, and all of it is really rewarding to be a part of and get to shape and get to contribute to.
Yeah, absolutely.
Looking forward to seeing folks, hopefully some of the people in the chat at Worlds.
Yeah, I'll be announcing the Hyperspace qualifiers.
The Coruscant Invitational.
Coruscant Invitational.
Yeah, on Wednesday. All right. Well, thank you everyone so much for watching. We stream every Tuesday and Thursday, so make sure you subscribe and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post new videos. We'll be back on Tuesday. We're going to be talking about Miss Marvel, which is the hero pack upcoming for Marvel Champions. So that's very exciting. And then on topic with this stream, next Thursday, the 10th, we're going to be doing kind of a Worlds preview. So we'll have some X-Wing talk, we'll have some Destiny talk with you guys and the Destiny devs, and just kind of talking about what we can expect and what might shake up the meta. So come and hang out with us for that. Thanks to Carolina Game Tables for this awesome streaming table. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. We'll catch you next time.